Okay, this video is chapter 3 from my new book, Best Christian Art, and this chapter is about the Old Testament. We'll probably do it in a couple parts because there's a lot of paintings in this chapter. So the first thing to start out is the Sistine Chapel ceiling by Michelangelo, and it's extraordinary. It tells the story of Genesis, the creation of man, the creation of world. Then it goes into the Noah's flood and whatnot, and you've got all the prophets in the periphery. So here's looking at it again from another side. It's painted in 1509 in the Vatican in Rome, of course. Pope Julius commissioned Michelangelo to paint this, and it's considered by many to be the greatest artistic achievement of any human ever in the history of the world. Goethe, the great German, said that you should go there just to see how much one human could do. He did this in a couple of years. The painting on the far wall is The Last Judgment by Michelangelo, and that apparently took him about 6 years. I don't know if he was distracted for part of that, but that's also considered one of the greatest paintings ever in the history of the world. The best painting out of the whole ceiling is this one right here, which is the creation of Adam. So there's God and there's Adam. I'll show it. That's what pictures on the cover of the book as well. Okay, here's God, separating the night from the dark, the sun from the moon and everything, creating the sun and the earth. Okay, here's a picture of, creation of some of the animals there. This one's by Doré, Gustave Doré, The Creation of the Birds and the Fishes by God. This one's by Tintoretto, God Creating the Animals. And then here's the most important painting, of course. This is Michelangelo's Creation of Adam. So man being created in the image of God, therefore man being part divine as well as part beast. But the fact that he's part divine entitles him to be treated fairly, kindly, nicely, given freedom of speech, private property, respect, the ability to pursue life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It's kind of interesting. Michelangelo was doing some dissections at that time, trying to learn human anatomy. And you can see his background shape here is like that of a brain. Here's the frontal lobe, here's the temporal lobe, occipital lobe, parietal lobe would be right up in here, and he's bringing Eve to Adam. So that's a rather dramatic picture. This leg extends downward, kind of like the stalk of the pituitary. These legs extend downward, kind of like the brainstem. Okay, so here is Eve being created. There's two different versions of it, but from Adam's rib simultaneously. So anyways, 1510 by God, a painting by Michelangelo. Here's my favorite of all the Adam and Eve paintings, so I just included this one, Adam and Eve in the Garden by Bruegel and Rubens from 1615. And that's how man should live to a large extent, eating plant foods, getting along with all the animals. That's before the fall. So before the fall, everybody was a vegetarian apparently. And here's after the fall, she got tricked into eating the apple. He went along with it, wanted to be with her. So this is really sort of Domenichino, the painter's, bit of a Michelangelo imitation there. And this black ball in the back of it looks like a stick shift, a flying brain. So anyways, this is after the fall. And here is Michelangelo, not Michelangelo, this is Coypel, I think, painting, or Charles Notorier, okay, excuse me, rebuking Adam and Eve for having disobeyed him and eaten the apple. And here is John Milton, who's dictating Paradise Lost to his daughters. He's blind. By Delacroix. And one thing about Paradise Lost, I tried to read it initially, and it's very difficult to read de novo because the way he writes, very Latinate style, a lot of passive voice. But there's a book called Paradise Lost in plain English, and when you read it in plain English, I thought it was great. Then I really liked it. Oh, here it is, in plain English version by Joseph Lanzara. Makes it easy to read, understand, and it's fun. Yeah. And Darwin loved that book. And it is. It's a great book. Once you kind of get the feel of it, it's great. Very entertaining. Pandemonium in Hell by John Martin, the great English painter, 1841. So, Satan fell, the fallen angel, regrouped himself down in hell. Here's Satan presiding over his infernal council, again by John Martin. You know, Satan, the fallen angel. And here's Archangel Michael subduing Satan. This painting by Luca Giordano. The Battle in Heaven. Oh, I include songs, so I'll write in songs whenever I think they kind of go with the painting. Like the Battle of Evermore by Led Zeppelin kind of fits for this. Take It All Back, sung by Tauren Wells. That's a more recent song. It's a good one. Oh, and here's a good Dostoevsky quote as well. God and the devil are fighting for the heart of men. Sometimes, even if he has to do it alone and his conduct seems crazy, a man must set an example, and so draw men's souls out of their solitude, and spur them on to some act of brotherly love, that the great idea may not die. So, and then I like Augustine's quote here. Wrong is wrong even if everyone is doing it. Right is right even if no one is doing it. And when people think that way, they're hard to control. So here's another painting. Looks very similar. This is the one again of Michael the Archangel with Satan. And this one, Trampling the Devil by Guido Reni from 1636. It's just sort of, you know, the skill in the painting is extraordinary. Okay, here's the entry of the animals into Noah's Ark by Francesco Bassano. Okay. Noah listened to God, started making his ark early. So the question to ask yourself is, do you need to make an ark? And what does that mean for you? Okay, so here is after the flood, so they came back. So the story is that everyone was a vegetarian, but then after the flood, the vegetation, the plant foods were largely wiped out, so people had to start eating some animal foods, and that's apparently the story, but we were supposed to go back to plant foods, apparently. And there's like Daniel's diet. Remember the story of Daniel? And his men chose to eat the vegan diet, and they were a lot healthier than the Babylonian king's men. And here's the Tower of Babel. So, the Tower of Babylon. Painting by Pieter Bruegel the Elder. When mankind got a little bit too uppity and God put him in his place. That tends to be the pattern. The man gets too uppity, turns his back on God, and then God pushes him down. That's the pattern certainly in the Old Testament, and it seems to also be happening in the modern world. And that actually matches a little bit the pattern of the collapse of civilizations by Giambattista Vico. That a civilization starts out, you know, as Will Durant had said, sort of stoic, religious, hardworking, moral, and then they gradually eventually prosper, and once they begin to prosper, they start becoming dissolute. Their philosophers start to mock the religion, and then the society falls apart. And that's also shown really nice in the paintings by Thomas Cole. I'll show the Thomas Cole paintings in a later chapter in this book, but it's one of the best set of story paintings ever. And the Tower of Babel, though, catches the idea in one painting. Oh, and this is just a diagram of, you know, the common pattern in the Bible. And I learned these ideas, too, from Northrop Frye, his book about interpretation of Bible and the Great Bible Code. So the typical cycle of life in the Old Testament is the population's moving up. They're unified, they're religious, they're brave, they're very pro-family, they're hardworking, they know their history of their ancestors, and they live like utopia for a while. But then they start losing their faith, becoming decadent, hedonistic, they become stupider, they're not united. The factionalism causes them to be divided worse. And then they start having all kinds of stupidity problems, and they just get taken over by someone else, and they're enslaved and brutalized. And hopefully that's not going to happen in our place. Okay, here's the painting of Sarah showing Hagar to Abraham. So he was a future big patriarch. They hadn't been able to have a child. They're both quite old. So her servant girl was Hagar, and it's thought that her offspring, Ishmael, was the beginning of one great religion. Their child was, according to some interpretation of the Old Testament, the beginning of another great religion, and then supposedly a descendant also led to another great religion. So that's sort of the standard interpretation of the Old Testament. Okay. Here's a patient of the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. And the wife of Lot, here's Lot with his two daughters. She was not supposed to turn and look back. She did, and then she was struck and turned into a pillar of salt. So when God tells you to do something, don't look back. Just do it. Okay, here is the drawing of Esau and selling his birthright for a bowl of porridge by, like oatmeal by Gerald Holt. And so the gist of this was that Esau was a pretty good hunter, but he was kind of stupid. Jacob was smarter, and Esau basically traded his birthright as the oldest son for a bowl of porridge, which is an incredibly stupid thing to do. And to some extent, you can say that symbolizes Western civilization trading its great traditions and ways of living, all for modern stupidity, which is about worth as much as a bowl of oatmeal by itself. So here's the same story. Esau trading his birthright for a bowl of porridge. An incredibly stupid thing to do. And how accurate is that to modern civilization, trading its greatness in so many ways for this stupidity? All right, here's the painting Stairway to Heaven. This one's also by Gerald Holt. It also can be described as being Jacob's ladder from Genesis 28:12, where Jacob had a dream where he saw a stairway reaching up to heaven, and the angels of God were ascending and descending it. And of course, this reminds one of the Stairway to Heaven song by Led Zeppelin. Here is the painting of the children of Jacob selling their brother Joseph into slavery. Not a nice thing to do, but they later realized it was bad. Luckily, Joseph was a real talented guy and became very successful and rose in Egypt under the Pharaoh. Here's Joseph interpreting the dream of the butler and the baker, and this also improved his favor in the eyes of the Pharaoh. This is a painting by Alexander Ivanov, a Russian artist. And that's one thing I noticed. If you go back to the 1800s, there were a lot of really good paintings by Russian artists. So, again, it's a typical story. When Russia was Christian, it had a lot of great writers and great painters in the 1800s. The writers, Dostoevsky, Tolstoy, Gogol, and a couple of Turgenev and a couple other ones, okay? Pushkin, poet. And then they also had a bunch of good painters, like Ivanov and others. And while they're Christian, they produced a lot, despite the fact they still had serfdom. But once they, lost that, after 1970, they stink. Excuse me. Excuse me. Sorry about that. Moses on Top of Mount Sinai by Jean-Léon Gérôme. He was a really good French painter. Did a lot of good Bible scenes and a lot of good ancient Greeks and Roman stuff. So there's Moses on Mount Sinai and the idea of getting the Ten Commandments from God. For the law was given by Moses, but grace and truth came by Jesus Christ. Okay. Okay, so here's a big Moses statue as done by Michelangelo. Okay, that's great. All right, well, I'm going to call it right there for now. So that'll be, chapter 3A. I'll do 3B probably tomorrow. Hope that was interesting for you.